topic today is licensing, and we have David on the phone. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hmm. I don't know. I don't know what I would say. I study human behavior. I've been doing that for a long time. I've been in technology um, as a strategist and growth strategist and implementer for companies in a number of different sectors. Licensing is an interesting topic, and I don't know, Michelle, what takes best care of your audience and how to talk about it.
I think I think it's also. I mean, the community is in the Bay Area, or even globally, and I think licensing to me is it's many things, right? It's relationship with other people because it's almost like a rental. It's also respect for another person's idea and IP because you're making payments for it. And it's also a revenue model for startups because you're making money out of it. We both live in Silicon Valley, which is really in a valley of different ideas. And I think with licensing, I think respect and recognizing other people's ideas are really, really important. So I guess I just wanted to talk about licensing and the basics of it, right? And licensing also covers, brands and different brands, where you can license, their art, like for example, Hello Kitty. If you wanted to use another Hello Kitty, another person's artwork on a T-shirt, for example, then you would basically enter into some kind of licensing structure with them. So anything that is related to licensing, would be good.
So you bring up a good point, I think, relative to acknowledgement of other people's work, uh, and and an interesting path that you could go down there, particularly for startups and entrepreneurs. I think is that there isn't really that much that's new, not really new, innovative, new. There are a lot of things that have been rewrapped. Uh, so it's the same old concerns taken care of in a slightly different way because of some technological twist, perhaps, that's been added. So you said that you were interested in talking about software licensing. So where I'm pointing is that none of the ideas that we're really having are all that new. And so I think a very interesting aspect of licensing that becomes possible with things like crypto and fractionalization of ownership along a lot of different lines. But what becomes interesting is the tracking. Okay, because if I had this idea and somebody else had this idea, and then you're going to use maybe a combination of those ideas with your idea, there needs to be some flow that reaches back to some origination somewhere. Not just, oh, today I thought of this, so I own it. I don't think really that's how how it works. We're operating daily out of other ideas that people have given us as we have grown up and learned.
I think one just to add to your point is I think one exception of confidential information is independent development, right? So I might be building something and you might be making something, but we didn't know each other and I didn't talk to you. So we're having the same idea, for example. And
Yes.
because we think of it differently, we're not copying each other. However, with the blockchain though, if technology is going to be different and it's going to track who did what and who invented what at what time, should that not be an exception anymore?
An exception.
To,
So,
to
so to
confidential
me,
information.
well, how do you tell? Where do you begin to draw the line with the declaration? We have so many things that are happening that are actually pointing in different directions all at the same time. It gets confusing. I get concerned when people talk about exception because that means they want some special treatment for their specific situation that would be different than what would be chosen for somebody else. Standards should be standards, and exceptions are, by definition, a request to be excluded from the standard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I understand that. I'm just mixing or consider. I mean, seeing foreseeable issues with tracking versus
Yes.
the current way that we are doing business right now, which is if similar inventions are done independently, there is that exception to confidential information, right? So with tracking, it will disrupt that. So and they're not,
Yeah.
they're similar.
So here's maybe a real life example. I'm in the process of working with a number of other people, and we're building something, and we're building that on the back of our teachers' ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and so in the way that we talk about what we're doing, we include that we wouldn't have these thoughts and ideas if it wasn't for those that came before us. So we have to include that. We're working to build on top of that. And then there's this aspect that I think you're poking at relative to confidentiality that I think is really interesting, in that I could literally give you the keys of what I'm talking about, like the elemental building blocks, and you wouldn't know necessarily how to put those together, not in the same way that we're going to put those together. And so it becomes very interesting, because the posture that I've kind of taken on is I'll tell people the pieces, but I don't tell people how the pieces go together necessarily. That's a level of confidentiality to come as we move into partnerships with people to try and take pieces of the puzzle that have already been built and then use those in a fractional model to build something bigger that can be offered to a much bigger audience.
So the details might be implemented differently. For
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Always, right? Because of specifics. I think it's fascinating that people talk a lot in the entrepreneurial world about, they talk from generalities. So when somebody told me last week they're trying to invent several different companies at once, and they're busy with this and that and the other thing, and they were equating themselves to Elon Musk, and saying, well, Elon doesn't get much sleep, and I don't get much sleep either. I'm doing it the Elon Musk way. And I thought to myself, that's pretty interesting, because you're not him, and there's a lot of possibility that comes with the network and the power that Elon has that it's not present for many other people. But that doesn't stop them from trying to associate, right? I'm doing the Walmart strategy, or somebody the other day said, we're the Google of this. And those are interesting to me,
But the details
from a lot of different perspectives, but we might be wandering off course here. So what do you see? Like, are you satisfied with our conversation so far?
I am. I think it's interesting, and I think if we bring in emerging technology like artificial intelligence and blockchain and whatnot, I think it becomes more interesting because I see the emergent technology disrupting the way that we are doing business right now, or the relationships between each other and our entities right now. So, I mean, comparing uh, in the startup world, sometimes people say that they're Uber this or the Google that, and they're using it as an analogy. Of course, the details and the specifics are very different. And even with IP, such as patents, the way that two people are doing one thing could be done in different ways, unless it's exactly the same, right?
An interesting thing around patenting, perhaps, is this idea of smart contract. And I'm not sure, when I listen to a lot of people talk about smart contract, I think, wow, they're not talking about what I would implement as a smart contract, which is getting the language basics of, what is it that we're generally going to do together, right? What are the declarations? Where are our speculations? What assessments, opinions do we have about things that our work is really to run those to ground? Are we really looking at things the way that it's valuable to look at them to invent and grow something?
Yeah. Um. For I think there's pros and cons regarding patents. But when I think about smart contracts, I think we're not there yet. I think the industry is so new. I think for me, smart contracts is not really a new concept, but I think what is interesting about that is that in combination with the blockchain that allows tracking, transparency, not being able to erase, so you can backtrack it. I think that is very important. So I was trained by Cisco Systems, so they had contracts. They commoditized the contracts a long time ago. And for me here, the current smart contracts in terms of blockchain, they're really dumb. I mean, they're basically if then, and I don't think we're there yet.
Yes.
But I see the and I think even the user interface is not there yet. But I see the potential of it as a transactional attorney, right? I can see it used on a lot of websites, from Web 1.0, that would allow for better transparency and accountability, especially when they have been used for fraud. And as I move out of corporate world, I guess, um, I've discovered that there are a lot of people who dishonored what they've promised. And I
Mm.
think smart contracts are really useful in terms of entering into a relationship where, you're, which is a little bit better because that promise is programmed into a smart contract. And one could hope,
Maybe.
and one could
M-
hope
m-
that the promise, will be fulfilled.
Maybe this is where I think there's a lot that can actually come forth, because if you look at the way that people actually engage with one another and begin to interact in some kind of project specific, it's a sequence of events that are trust building basically along the way, and then you declare you're going to begin to do something. But what I would offer is different, perhaps, and available to us in how we start to work with smart contracts, rather than try and define everything up front. It's going to be like this, it's going to be like that, it's going to do this, it's going to do this other thing. What if you flipped it over and declared the intention? Don't declare the specifics, because that takes a lot of time. And in my experience in entrepreneurial endeavor, which has been my whole life, what you begin with is not what you're working with in the middle, and it's not what you're working with in the end. You need to have some flexibility, and I see a mistake that a lot of people make is they try and specify everything to the nth detail and spend all that time when really the world is just passing them by. So smart contract into general intention is what I'm saying, rather than try and smart contract your way into a lot of specifics that have to be tracked and become not the point.
I think that's an art, though. Of as a transactional attorney, in general, it's how much disclosure and how specific you want the contract to be. And that includes a smart contract. I think some attorneys are very detail oriented, and I think that prevent the business deal from going forward. But if you're too general, if something happens, you're not covered, right? So I think there's an art to how specific you want to be, and make sure that both parties outside of the contract is really clear on the intentions.
Well, this is what I'm saying is you can't be. I mean, you have an intention for this call, and I have an intention for this call, and we're on the same call, but those in fact are different, and you don't know these things until you get into actual language and talking back and forth. Oh, did you mean this, or how about if we looked at it from this perspective? And the element of time is important in this. So I'm an advocate for flexibility, and I'm also rigorous about time, meaning that if I see things aren't going in a particular way, I want to move sooner than later to keep things heading off course. Yeah, it's a skill. It's a set of sensibilities. It's practice of these things over some time. And it can be simple, but as you've said several times, I think we as humans don't make it simple with the things that we do that mostly come out of our psychology, our explanation, our excuse system for, well, why didn't I do what I said I was going to do? Well, anyway, so how are we doing on licensing here?
I think we're doing good. I just wanted to point out and add to it is really about relationships and communication. I think you mentioned that, because I've closed, a great amount of deals over the last, 15, 20 years. And, working with, Fortune 500 companies, from Cisco to eBay to Samsung, and PayPal, as well as Apple. And I think a lot of it is really communication and relationship, and how you communicate with the other party, the other people, and and creative solutions on how to resolving items. And I think that when you
how to resolve or solve what?
I say items. I don't call them issues. Because they're not issues. They're just different items that you might like or reject, or you don't like. So I call them items, not issues or conflicts. Because I think our language plays a big part in our attitude, right? So, if someone doesn't like green jelly beans, you don't know that until you ask, So, David, why don't you like, why don't you like these jelly beans? Well, because you might say it contains green, and all I have to do is say, okay, we'll have jelly beans and we'll remove the green ones. And that would basically resolve an item.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is, conversation, communication is very interesting. Relationship, it's all a very interesting set of topics. It is exactly the difference between when things work and when things don't work. We've studied the heck out of things.
Hmm.
We've studied the heck out of locations. We've spent a huge amount of time improving productivity around the logistical conversation of things and the location of those things. The conversational model that has things happen effectively, efficiently, and enjoyably is really where it's at. I think that's where the most of our productivity into the future is going to come from, is within language, and languages within language.
But don't you find it really interesting, though, that as we move to a more data-driven society, we see AI analyzing everything, right? So we get and we receive metrics on everything, and I think that data or metrics interplay with our language and and our relationship with each other, right?
Yes, 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 yes. I'm laughing because the data thing it's a double-edged sword. Uh, as an analogy, okay, so I wanted to test out some security cameras, and so I bought a couple of different brands and I used them in the same application in the same way, and then I tried to figure out which one was really going to be more valuable to me in what I wanted in terms of the concerns that I was really trying to take care of. And so what I discovered is that I put these cameras in place, and one of them had a notification aspect of it. And before I knew it, my email was blowing up. Thousands of emails, literally, with notifications from these security cameras. And then the other one I used where you had more access actually to the data, but I'll be darned if I could really find the event that I wanted. So it's almost kind of like a tease. So we've got this data and the ability to really to extract value from the data. It still takes more work, more energy, more time to find the gold. I don't necessarily buy that it's just a big pile of data. I could show you big piles of things here at the ranch that we would struggle to find a valuable element in it.
How do you see, you know, I think there are different companies that analyze data, and I mean, and then there's also dead data that certain companies use. I've seen certain
Yeah,
companies use quantum.
I don't know enough about it at that level. I've got a friend, colleague that has built and sold company in that space, but I haven't really spent a lot of time talking to him about the ins and outs of it. But the from an entrepreneur's perspective, I think what I'm talking about is kind of funny because it's just another thing that you can drive yourself crazy trying to figure out that actually has zero to do with building a product that somebody cares enough about to actually pay you to use.
Yeah, so back to licensing, and I think a lot of these are interrelated. I think we're just kind of going a little bit around, but I think it's really good because then I think people will see the different aspects of it, and really, I just want to talk about value. Like, how could licensing bring value to a startup?
There's it depends. But that's kind of the answer all the time, right? Because you have to look at the specifics of the situation and what's the intention, what are the assets that you have that are commandable? What can you really use to produce something, and then maybe kind of back into the question that you're offering, because it's just so different case by case.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about them generally, but I find that isn't really that helpful to people, because then they hear the message generally, but they still don't know how to apply anything specifically. It's like a thought that's not operationalizable.
I wanted to touch a little bit about open source and licensing. They seem to be different, and a lot of these blockchain technologies are open sourced. How do
Hmm.
you how do you see that
I
playing out?
love open source. I love open source idea. It took a while to kind of figure out how to actually monetize it, but I love it, and it's back, I think, to the ability to track some things. There's one kind of like meta idea set behind, I think, what we're talking about, Michelle, that's connected to privacy. And for tracking to take place, for data to be valuable, you actually have to input into the system. And so it's another double-edged sword in terms of the things that will be valuable to us in the future. If we can tell from the data has to get there in the first place, and people are resistant because they think that it's a betrayal of their privacy, because it has been.
Do you,
Software licensing, the confusion around what we signed up for to use Facebook is huge. but there's an agreement there. You can read it. You can read it over time. You can see how it was added to. And another fascinating part of this is that you talked about the legal aspect, and so if your licensing agreement is a document that somebody else should have a lawyer look at before they sign it, now you're getting into some very interesting territory relative to rights and licensing and use, and whether or not you have a valid contract to begin with.
yeah, I mean, with Facebook, what is interesting is that they have a user agreement, right, or services agreement on their website. They basically say that the service is free and we could use it. However, they also have a privacy policy, but the issue with that though is that there are a lot of actions that have been shown that are outside of the four corners of these agreements. So,
Hmm.
and they have been fined, by government agencies recently for violating
Well,
it.
well,
Their price of stock
hang on,
has gone up.
hang on there, perhaps. I mean, I see what you're saying. I think there's more to be said about what just happened, because yes, they agreed to pay $5 billion, and that is through a system that has been happening more and more over time, in that this is how these agencies are funding themselves these days. So it isn't like there was a big huge investigation. It wasn't like there was any real conclusion that was made. It was one of these things where the payment of $5 billion was simpler than the rest of it that was going to take place.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least though they did something about it.
Well,
um,
I don't know. There's duplicity everywhere. So I mean, we could go down a couple different tunnels there, but we don't have really time for that in what what you've got left here.
And so my question, and this is really interesting, if we had blockchain technology to track ideas before Facebook, would Facebook become more successful, right?
Say that you said something. If we had something that played into something, what was it? IBFF?
No. I saying that if we had tracking and blockchain technology of different ideas before Facebook is made, would Facebook become as successful today?
To which set of individuals?
Probably
it's,
the
because
CEO.
you're yeah, but so the generally what makes companies work is effort by many people, right?
Yes.
And so what's interesting about the Facebook model is the free website where you get to use it and then we get to use everything that you put into it. Thank you very much for putting it in. And the ideas that got shared back and forth, and it certainly makes for very interesting maps. But would it be more successful? I think maybe it would be more successful in that more people would perhaps have benefited from the ideas that they threw out there. But the website, Facebook, none of these websites actually are currently doing anything close to what we're talking about. There's the data there, and there's ways to look at it. They have the ways to look at it that the general public doesn't. If I say something like, I you know that I like to talk about perspectives and things that I think are important in terms of distinctions, I always capitalize in this weird way that I type things out. But I've been talking about perspectives for a long time. So if you then begin to talk about perspectives at some point in time, did then I get some credit if for the credits that then you got as a fractional model for reciprocation and benefit?
Yeah, I mean, but you have to tell the difference between, or determine or decipher the difference between the general aspect of it and also the specifics, and I think besides the people that make it work, it's also timing, right? And all the technology that is around at that time. And remember when Facebook first began, I think there were a lot of widget. I think Facebook matured into what it is today. But, I think there were a lot of gamification that happened. I remember poking. I remember a lot of people sending me, food and heels, purses and whatnot. So I think it has changed and it has evolved. But
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can look at the original dialogues between people that I jokingly say it was, basically grunting in a box. And now there's actually some pretty sophisticated dialogue going on back, about complicated things between some very bright people that's done very respectfully. It's not the normal, but I'm just pointing to a wide variety of capability we've now got through this tool. A lot of people complain about it, but it's also you can use a hammer to build a beautiful something, or you can use it to really damage your thumb. It's still the same hammer.
Yeah. So I do not have Facebook stock, so I'm just being objective about it. And my last question to you is, do you have any wisdom or advice that you would like to provide to the community?
No calls to action. No. No, I think this conversation is. I think it's been good. I mean, I hope some people find some value in it. It's been a pleasure to talk with you in a different way than we've talked before. Thank you for that opportunity.
You're welcome.
And I think there's some value in what we already talked about for people. I can't. Nothing comes to mind as like the tagline I'd leave you with.
So thank you for your time. So until next time, I'll see you.
Take good care. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.